The chill of the morning fog merges with the scent of blood and wet wool. Through the low clouds, the ragged breathing of men about to clash face to face can be heard. One of them raises above his head a long blade, capable of cleaving a shield in half. He is called neither god nor hero, but simply a warrior. Yet in his hands is the symbol of Viking fury and power, the Danish axe. Why did precisely this weapon become a symbol of terror even among knights encased in steel? And how could a simple edge of iron break the laws of battle? The answer is deeper than it seems, and is connected not only with metal, but also with the very nature of man. Archaeologists found similar axes in burials from the late 10th century in Denmark, Norway, and England. Their form? An elongated blade, nearly half a meter long on a long light ash handle. This was not a tool, but a sophisticated engineering marvel designed for maximum swing force. According to chroniclers' accounts, only the best wielded such a weapon, those whom even their own people feared. This weapon was called broadaxe. In Old English it means broad blade, but it sounds more like a warning. One movement, and a body protected by chainmail opens up like fabric. The blade itself was thin, slightly curved, so as not to get stuck in bone, and the long handle allowed for strikes like a hammer blow, with an inertia that broke even ribs beneath armor. Imagine this scene: early morning, steam above the marsh, a dozen men in woolen tunics. One steps forward, his breath merging with the cries of seagulls. He raises the axe, the sun glides along the steel edge, and in that moment, the enemy sees not a man, he sees death. Historians wrote that the Danish axe bit into armor like a shovel into soft earth. The term without which this moment cannot be understood is Berserker. This is what Vikings who fell into battle frenzy were called. They felt no pain, heard no commands, knew no fear. Their bodies were as if carved from wood, and their movements from a hurricane. In battle, a berserker transformed into an embodiment of strength, and the Danish axe was an extension of this fury. But what made it truly invincible? Why did metal forged from simple iron prove stronger than all the defenses of the Middle Ages? The answer lies hidden in a technology that modern smiths call pattern welding. This is a method in which strips of iron of different qualities were twisted and joined into a single whole, creating both flexibility and strength simultaneously. Such a blade did not break upon impact. It lived with the hand. According to various sources, each such axe could weigh about 2 kilograms. This was enough to maintain swing speed but not to overload the shoulder. A Viking held the weapon with both hands, like a dancer leading his partner. The blade didn't just fly downwards, it rotated, gaining power with every centimeter of its path. Modern reenactors say that a blow from such an axe can penetrate even a 2-millimeter thick steel helmet. Now consider, in that era, there were no helmets with reinforcing ribs, and chainmail protected only against a direct stabbing blow. One precise swing, and fate was sealed. But the true power of the Danish axe was not in the metal, but in the hands of those who wielded it. Every warrior underwent years of combat training, and not just for the sake of killing. They believed that through battle, a path to Odin opened. Every blow was a prayer, every swing a challenge to the gods. And yet, despite this sacred fury, the Danish axe was not a weapon for the common warrior. Only those who mastered the special art of balance, between life and death, between reason and madness, could wield it. This is how legends are born, legends that endure through centuries. And when the clang of axes merged with the roar of the northern wind, the earth trembled. But this was only the beginning, the moment when the power of steel first united with human fury. Further, this connection would transform into something more, into a symbol of power and fear that forever changed the face of medieval battles. The flames of bonfires reflect on the blades. The wind from the sea smells of salt and blood. The night before battle is the longest in any warrior's life. Vikings did not pray in silence. They sharpened their weapons. Every click against the stone sounded like a promise. Among a multitude of swords and spears, the long axe stood apart. It could not be hidden, nor could it be used in close combat. It demanded space. It demanded rhythm. He who wielded it controlled not just iron, he controlled the timing of the battle. Archaeologists who investigated discoveries on the island of Funen claimed that many of these axes had handles up to 1 meter 20 centimeters long. This was no accident. Such a length allowed for striking from a distance that a swordsman could no longer reach. This is why axe-wielding fighters became the center of the attack, the point from which chaos began. When the Danish axe entered the enemy's formation, the ranks scattered as if blown away by a northern storm. Such a weapon demanded incredible coordination. One wrong step, and the blow would take off the head not of an enemy, but of a comrade. That is why a special rank existed, Huskarl. These were the king's personal bodyguards, the elite northern warriors who wielded axes to perfection. Huskarls were considered a symbol of loyalty and strength. Their presence alongside the chieftain instilled confidence in allies and terror in enemies. Huskarls trained not just to fight, they learned to feel inertia. To hold a two-handed axe after a strike was like stopping a flying boulder. Therefore, they used a special technique. Instead of swinging from top to bottom, they threw the blade in an arc, turning each blow into a flexible, almost choreographic gesture. Modern fencers say that this movement is closer to a blacksmith's hammer blow than to a swordsman's strike. These fighters wore chainmail made of thousands of iron rings weighing about 12 kilograms. Beneath the chainmail was dense wool, absorbing sweat and softening blows. On their heads, an iron helmet with a nasal guard, and yet none of these elements saved them from the Danish axe. One swing, and the blow passed diagonally, as if the axe was drawing a line of fate. The very philosophy of Viking combat was built on the idea of a breakthrough. Their tactic, which historians call the boar's head, a wedge formation where the leading ranks broke through the enemy's defenses. Now imagine a man with an axe standing at the head of the wedge. The first second of engagement decided everything. A top-down blow shattered shields, cleaved spears, and opened the way for the rest. Historical sources, including the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, mention the Battle of Malden at the end of the 10th century, where the Vikings employed precisely such tactics. Then, the Anglo-Saxons first encountered the massive use of Danish axes. One chronicler wrote, "They struck as if Thor's own hammers had descended upon our land." This was not poetic exaggeration. It was an eyewitness observation. The term that defined the Viking strength at that moment was hugr, translated from Old Norse, inner fire, resolve. Without it, a man could not be a warrior. Hugr was what transformed an ordinary peasant into a berserker, and a berserker into a legend. When a man took up the axe, he had to feel this fire within. Otherwise, the weapon simply would not obey. This inner fervor combined with practical knowledge of metal. Northern smiths, working in harsh climatic conditions, knew that soft iron would bend and overly hard iron would crack. Therefore, they created a special structure: hard steel along the edge of the blade and soft iron in the center. This created the effect of flexibility. Upon impact, the edge maintained its sharpness, while the center absorbed vibration. Even modern smiths consider this balance a technological marvel of its time. But it wasn't just the technique that made the axe a weapon of terror. The psychological effect was no less important. An opponent, seeing before him a man armed with such an axe, often lost the will to resist. Field tests by reenactors show that the sound of a shield shattering after an axe blow evokes an instinctive fear in observers, an ancient, almost primal one. This is what the Vikings exploited. The enemy's fear was part of their strategy. When the detachment raised their axes simultaneously, the air filled with a low hum, like the sea before a storm. This sound was a signal. The battle begins. And at the moment when the first blows fell upon the shields, everything mingled. Screams, the clang of iron, the roar of men, and somewhere in this chaos, the edge of an axe gleamed, already carrying the fate of another victim. However, the fame of the Danish axe did not stop on the fields of England. It began to change the very military culture of Europe. Within a single generation, even the Anglo-Saxons began to adopt northern combat methods, creating their own axe-wielding detachments. The era of swords gave way to an era of a blade capable of cleaving armor and the enemy's consciousness simultaneously. And when a northern warrior stood on the shore, leaning on his axe, the sun set behind the line of the fjord, and the shadow of its blade fell upon the water, like a sign. It was a symbol of ultimate resolve, and a promise that whoever lifted this blade would never return the same. From this moment on, the Danish axe ceased to be merely a weapon. It became a legend. The first rays of the sun fall upon shields, arrayed in a wall. The air trembles with the cry of horns. The sea behind boils. Ahead, enemy land. This is the dawn of the Battle of Stiklestad, 1030 A.D., Norway. Here, according to chroniclers, not just armies clashed, but eras, old pagan fury against the new faith. Among the warriors standing in the front ranks, the long shafts of axes are visible. Danish axes. Their blades gleam like tongues of flame. No one speaks. Only breathing, only a step forward. Historians note that, in this battle, the Vikings first employed a combined formation, where axe-wielding fighters advanced not in the vanguard but slightly behind the spearmen. Thus they could strike from above, breaking the enemy's defense in an arc. This decision changed the course of the battle. It showed that the Danish axe was not merely an instrument of destruction, but a part of a military system. He who wielded the axe knew, to survive, one must feel the rhythm of battle. First a spear thrust, then the movement of the axe, then a step forward. Everything happened in seconds. A mistake cost a life. That is why Vikings trained not only with strength, but also with breath. Modern archaeologists found training grounds in Birka and Hedeby, where warriors practiced blows on wooden mannequins filled with sand. These findings confirm that the art of axe-wielding was a system, not random fury. Chronicles describe that in the Battle of Stiklestad, axe blades left deep gashes even on oak shields. One of the Scandinavian poets, the skald Thorfinn, wrote, "The axes sang, and their song was a song of wind and blood." This metaphor accurately conveys the feeling. An axe blow didn't just destroy, it created a sound that sent chills down the spine even of allies. There is a concept called fulldredge. This is an Old Norse term, meaning warrior in full measure. This is what they called someone who had passed all stages of training and could fight in any situation. Unlike ordinary militiamen, fulldredges wielded several types of weapons at once: spear, sword, and axe. But it was with the Danish axe that they felt freest. It was a tool that could be trusted like one's own heart. Archaeological data shows that axes were often decorated with engraving or silver inlay. On some finds, patterns in the form of snakes or wolves are visible, symbols of strength and cunning. These images had not a decorative but a magical meaning. Vikings believed that each drawing enhanced the spirit of the weapon. When a warrior raised his axe, he raised not just metal, but a living creature capable of protecting or avenging. But the power of the Danish axe was revealed not only in battle, but also in what happened after it. Sagas tell that warriors who survived battles were not quick to bury their weapons. They laid axes next to the fallen, as if transferring the continuation of the battle to the afterlife. In some graves, 2 axes were found, one for combat, the other ceremonial. This proves how deeply the weapon was woven into their faith. The weight of the axe allowed for the impossible, to cleave not only armor, but also wood, and even a horse's leg with a single blow. Modern tests of Danish axe reconstructions confirm if a blow lands at a 45-degree angle, the force of the impulse is approximately 150 kilograms of pressure per square centimeter. For a person of that time, this was the boundary between life and death. But Vikings rarely struck to kill. Their goal was to crush the formation. One blow to a shield could unbalance several fighters at once. When the front began to waver, berserkers rushed forward, tearing through the defenses. It was then that the Danish axe transformed from a weapon into an instrument of breakthrough. According to historians, the Battle of Stiklestad became a symbol of the end of the pagan era, but in the cultural memory of the Northerners, it remained a hymn to human resolve. Where faith and fury clashed, a new understanding of strength was born. Not the kind that breaks with a sword, but the kind that withstands the blows of fate. It is here that the archetype is formed, which would later become a myth. A warrior standing alone against 100, and his axe, an extension of his spirit. When such a man fell, the earth beneath him absorbed his energy. Archaeologists note that many burials of those times are positioned so that the axe blade points north, towards the land of the gods. Chroniclers' accounts state that after the battle, the bodies of the fallen were not buried for a long time. It was believed that if the blood soaked into the earth, it would strengthen the tribe. There is a certain poetry in this. Steel returns to the soil from which it was forged, preparing for a new war. The Viking axe was not just a weapon of destruction, it was a symbol of the connection between the earth, man, and the gods. When its blade passed through the air, it seemed to cut the boundary between worlds. And so, even centuries later, when we look at these ancient finds in museums, it feels as if a chill still emanates from their edge, the breath of a past that refuses to let go. But the history of the Danish axe did not end on the fields of Norway. It continued to live in the hands of those who adopted its form but did not understand its spirit. And it is in this contrast between power and meaning that the next chapter of this legend is hidden. The roar of battle subsides, but the echo of Danish axe blows continues to resound in Europe's memory. After Stiklestad, northern mercenaries began appearing far beyond their fjords. They were summoned to England, France, Byzantium. Wherever the tide of battle needed to be turned, there appeared men with long axes. Their presence became a sign of the decisive hour. But now these fighters were no longer merely barbarians, they were professionals of war. Thus, a new name was born, which became a legend, the Varangians. Historians note that within the Byzantine Imperial Guard, known as the Varangian Guard, the Danish axe became the primary weapon. 11th century chronicles record, they carry axes that gleam like silver, and when they move, the earth trembles. These men guarded the emperor, participated in campaigns to the Middle East, fighting against Normans and Saracens. They were known by a single sound, the heavy whistle with which the blade fell. Such a weapon demanded not just strength, but discipline. The Varangian Guard trained according to a strict schedule, using what would later be called combat forms, series of movements where every step and turn of the axe was pre-calculated. Modern researchers, studying bas-reliefs from Constantinople, suggest that the technique of wielding the Danish axe had similarities with the methods of Eastern halberds. But unlike them, the Scandinavian weapon was faster and more deadly in close combat. The key term of this period is angon. This is what the Byzantines called the long-shafted weapons of the Northerners, without distinguishing between spears and axes. But it was the Danish axe that stood out for its balance. The handle, made of dense ash, provided flexibility, and the center of gravity shifted towards the blade, created a pendulum effect. This allowed the warrior to strike not only from above, but also from the side, tearing through defenses. The Varangians earned a reputation as people who knew no fear. It was said that during the siege of Constantinople, when the walls trembled from battering rams, the emperor sent precisely them to repel attacks. Their axes didn't just cleave bodies, they broke ladders, shields, even wooden doors. In the Byzantine chronicles, it is noted that no weapon except their axe could stop the onslaught of the Franks. Archaeological finds confirm the words of the chroniclers. In Sweden, near Lake Mälaren, several Byzantine-type axes have been found, decorated with silver wire, with a carefully balanced blade. Such specimens were not used by peasants. This was an elite weapon, costing, when converted to modern currency, as much as a good war horse. But the Varangians' strength lay not only in their weapons, but also in their vow. Everyone who joined the guard swore an oath of loyalty, until their last breath. It was believed that a warrior who fell defending the emperor would be admitted to Valhalla without trials. Therefore, even in the last minutes, when the battle turned into chaos, the Varangians did not retreat. They were called the Iron Circle. The metaphor of the Iron Circle lives on today. Imagine the scene: heat, dust, the smell of pitch. On the walls of Constantinople, smoke. A crowd of enemies beats against the gates. And then, from around the corner, a formation of Varangians emerges. They walk slowly, as if death itself is advancing. Their axes are not weapons, but a sign of judgment. One swing, and the line of attack breaks. A second, and the enemies are already fleeing. This is not just a battle, it is a theater of power. However, it was precisely here, in the flames of the Byzantine Wars, that the Danish axe began to change. Eastern smiths added new forms to it, strengthening the pole, making the blade wider. Some specimens transformed into true works of art. But with this, the original wildness, that pure instinct of northern combat, was lost. The weapon became a symbol of power, a part of ceremonies. Historians write that in the 11th century, Varangian axes were used not only on the battlefield, but also in oath-taking rituals. The blade touched the shoulder of a new warrior, a sign that he was now bound to the brotherhood by blood. And yet, despite the new forms, the essence remained the same. The axe was a reminder: strength and honor are inseparable. Modern reenactment tests show that even with precise replication of the form of Byzantine axes, it's impossible to achieve the same dynamics as the original Danish ones. The metal, the alloy method, the balance, all of it was lost. Perhaps because the spirit itself was lost, that very hugger, the inner resolve without which the blade is just iron. And when the Varangians returned home, their axes were no longer mere weapons. They became relics. They were passed down through generations, laid in graves alongside chainmail. For descendants, it was a sign. The person who wielded such a weapon stood on the border of worlds. From that time, the Danish axe transformed into a symbol of transition, from barbaric freedom to organized military tradition. Its blade no longer just cleaved enemies, but also connected eras. When we see it on bas-reliefs and frescoes, we see not just iron, but a trace of human will, an imprint of a strength that cannot be measured by weight or handle length. But behind the glory of the Varangians and their axes lies a price paid by those who lived with weapons in hand. And this price can only be understood where history ceases to be heroic, in the last moments before demise. That is where the next chapter leads us. The dust settles on the battlefields, but the mark of the Danish axe remains not only in the earth, it is imprinted in the very memory of Europe. After the fall of Byzantium and the fading of the Viking Age, the axe disappears from the battlefields, but not from hearts. Its shadow still hovers over the north. Every smith who takes up metal knows he is not just forging a weapon. He is repeating an ancient rhythm that for centuries dictated the course of human fury. But glory always comes with a reckoning. And this reckoning is in the blood shed in the last great battle, where the Danish axe sounded for the final time as the voice of the gods. This was the year 1066. England. The Battle of Stamford Bridge, a battle where the last shadow of the Viking world perished. The chronicles tell of a giant with an axe who single-handedly held a bridge against an entire army of King Harold. History has not preserved his name. It is only said that he stood like a wall, and each time his axe was raised, a man fell. The sun reflected in the blade, and it seemed as if Tyr himself, the god of war, had returned to earth. A chronicler wrote, "He struck them as a woodcutter fells trees, and bodies lay one upon another." This image became a symbol of the end of an era. One man, one weapon, and all of history converging in a single moment. Harold's warriors tried to bypass him, threw spears, but he continued to stand until he was struck by a spear from below, through the planks of the bridge. Thus perished the last guardian of northern fury. His axe fell into the water, and with it, an era departed. Archaeological finds in the York area confirm people armed with typical Danish axes indeed fought in those lands. Their forms fully match 10th century specimens, proving that even 100 years later, this weapon remained a true symbol of the combat elite. The term that describes this moment is drengr. In Old Norse, this word meant a man of honor, a warrior who does not retreat a single step. In the sagas, a drengr is not just a hero, he is one who lives for heroic deeds, even if he knows he will die. For him, death is not an end, but a transition. When the last drengr on the bridge raised his axe, he knew he would perish, but he did not retreat. This was an act not of military, but of spiritual strength. Modern historians believe that it was on this day, at Stamford Bridge, that the Scandinavian era ended. 3 weeks later, another army, the Norman, would land in England and usher in a new era of knights and swords. But the symbol of strength would remain the same: a broad blade, a shaft, and a man ready to go to the end. Even the knightly swords of Normandy would later be forged with a curve reminiscent of the Danish axe's profile. The metaphor born on this field is simple and terrifying. The axe blade is the boundary between worlds. Each time it swings, a new story is born, and the old one recedes into shadow. So it was that day, blow after blow, breath after breath, until the last sound faded. When silence descended upon the river, and only the water carried downstream blood and fragments of armor, it seemed that even the gods had turned away. But the power of the axe is not only in destruction. It is in what it creates: order out of chaos. After Stamford Bridge, the Berserker's weapon became a symbol of resilience. It was depicted on gravestones, in coats of arms, in ship ornaments. Even centuries later, when Scandinavians embarked on long voyages, they carved the sign of the axe on their masts, as a promise that they would not abandon the fight as long as they lived. Recent scientific studies have shown that the metal from which Danish axes were forged contains traces of carbon characteristic of bog iron ore. This means the material was manually extracted from bog deposits, purified, heated, and tempered. Each piece of metal passed through the hands of a master dozens of times, and when the blade finally took shape, it held the breath of a human. Perhaps that is why these axes did not break, even when their owners perished. In the Oslo Museum, a specimen found in a burial dating from roughly that time is preserved. Its blade, covered in patina, still cuts the air if you pass your hand over it. Traces of palms remain on the handle, indented marks from long training sessions. This is not just an artifact. It is testimony that a weapon can be an extension of the soul. Psychologists studying the phenomenon of berserkers' battle frenzy say Vikings entered a state akin to a trance. Their breathing accelerated, their pulse pounded in their temples, their bodies became insensitive to pain. But it was precisely the Danish axe, its weight and rhythm, that helped them control this chaos. Each blow was like an exhale, each pause an inhale. Thus, harmony between fury and awareness was born. And when the last drengr fell, when his axe went under the water, the legend did not die. It dissolved into the northern wind, into the sound of blacksmiths' hammers, into the gleam of steel. People no longer fought in the name of gods, but everyone who raised a blade felt the same tremor. the very one that a berserker once felt with a Danish axe in his hands. The age of swords began. But the memory of the axe remained, like a wound, like a reminder that true strength is not in the weapon, but in the one who dares to lift it. And somewhere, beneath layers of earth and time, this axe still awaits its hour, to remind the world what it is made of. But history knows no rest. Every weapon, even buried for centuries, one day returns, not as iron, but as an idea. In our time, the Danish axe comes alive again, in the hands of reenactors, smiths, historians. Its form is studied with millimeter precision. Scientists create three-dimensional models, measure the sharpening angle, mass distribution, impact dynamics, and yet, no matter how hard they try, they cannot restore what the ancients called the spirit strength of the blade. Because it is not physics, it is a state. When a person takes a Danish axe into their hands, they feel the weight not of metal, but of history. Каждое движение кажется ритуалом. В этом оружии нет случайности. Его форма говорит о равновесии между разрушением и созиданием. Им можно убить, но можно и отсечь ложь, страх, слабость. В этом его вечный смысл. Сегодня она стала символом не насилия, а памяти. Ее изображают на гербах, в эмблемах клубов реконструкторов, в логотипах брендов, связанных с силой и честью. Ее копии выставляют в музеях не как орудие убийства, а как культурный код. Ведь датская секира – это не просто лезвие и древко, это воплощение человеческой воли, стремление преодолеть границы тела и времени. И если прислушаться, когда кузнец ударяет молотом по стали, можно услышать тот же звук, что и 1000 лет назад. Эхо древнего севера живет в каждом ударе. Оно напоминает, сила не в ярости, а в умении владеть ею. Датская секира учит не разрушать, а понимать, что любое действие оставляет след. И, возможно, в этом ее последняя, самая мудрая битва.